Please be seated. Thank you, Ahmed and Shazor. I just learned in Parish Hall that Gretchen's mother used to be a soloist for House of Hope, just a block from here. And so it is fitting that we have this beautiful vocal music today as we remember her. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. We gather today here at Unity Church-Unitarian and in homes, far and near. Apologies for my booming voice. I think we're all together now. We gather online and in person today for this time outside of time made holy by our attention and our presence, whether we are here in the sanctuary or home watching from afar. We are here in the presence of grief and loss, sitting side by side with life and love both. We gather today to celebrate the life of Gretchen Kreuter and to mourn her death last month. We gratefully recall her indomitable spirit, her energy, and her commitment to changing the world, making it a better place. And we give voice to our sorrow over her death, finding comfort in one another and giving shape to the farewell that now must finally be said. For those of you who have been viewing online, perhaps you saw the slideshow that preceded the service and that will follow it in the online version of this service, which will be available after today. And I want to name that the soundtrack to that slideshow was recorded by one of Gretchen's friends, Diane Aiken, director of the Edgewater Singers in Chicago. And she had instructions from Gretchen to, quote, conduct me out of this life. And so in that spirit, Diane provided the soundtrack for the slideshow, and you can also hear it in Parish Hall if you gather there after this service, of her choir singing 2 songs as Diane's way of conducting Gretchen out of this life. I also want to extend to those of you who are here in person an invitation to gather in Parish Hall afterwards and join with the family and friends to share more stories about Gretchen. And they are rich stories, so I hope you will come, enjoy the photo exhibits, and tell a few stories of your own. As we gather today to say our farewells to Gretchen, we unveil a deeper knowing that the spirit of life rings out even in the silences of death, that the energy that fueled Gretchen's life and work is still with us and within us, that love's embrace is larger than life and death both, that the seasons from which life springs circle over and over again, and that the grief we feel today in time may grow into tomorrow's hope, the breath of life and love eternally renewed as we continue on, carrying those we have loved and lost with us for the rest of our own days. I light our chalice now for this sacred gathering in time, remembering Gretchen's bold and driven energy, her love of people, of laughter, and of nature, and her commitment to leave this world a better place. Let us recall her own ignited energy as we light the chalice and begin our service today. Honoring Gretchen's commitment to justice for women and economic justice for all, let us join in singing Bread and Roses using Mimi Farina's melody as provided in your insert. Please remain standing, and if you would reach for a hymnal and share with me a responsive reading found in the back, reading number 719. It's the gray hymnal. These are words from George Eliot, also known as Mary Ann Evans. Oh, may I join the choir invisible of those immortal dead who live again in minds made better by their presence. Live in pulses stirred to generosity, in deeds of daring rectitude, in scorn of miserable aims that end with self. In thoughts sublime that pierce the night like stars, and with their mild persistence urge our search to vaster issues. So to live is heaven, to make undying music in the world, breathing a beauteous order that controls with growing sway the growing life of humanity. That better self shall live till human time fold its eyelids and the human sky be gathered like a scroll within the tomb. This is life to come, which martyred souls have made more glorious for us, who strive to follow. May I reach that purest heaven, be to other souls the cup of strength in some great agony. Enkindle generous ardor, feed pure love, beget the smiles that have no cruelty. Be the sweet presence of a good diffused and in diffusion ever more intense. So shall I join the choir invisible, whose music is the gladness of the world. Please be seated. Friends, today we acknowledge Gretchen's presence in the choir invisible, as the poet says, where she has joined those immortal dead who live again in minds made better by their presence. We have come together today to name and honor what was good and unique in Gretchen, and to make room in our own lives to carry those values on, to live them out in the world, each in our own way, as our true inheritance and as Gretchen's lasting legacy. Let us also name, though, that we are here to grieve, to acknowledge the loss her death creates, to let our tears come, and to receive the lessons that only grief can teach us. For it is grief that helps us learn from death the preciousness of life and the lasting nature of love that grows beyond it. Letting go, we discover, is the necessary requirement of carrying one so tenderly in our hearts. And in these lessons, we experience the embrace of love, reaching out now and always to hold us, comfort us, even guide us when our loved ones are no longer at our side. New grief also often awakens old grief. For losses of loved ones who died recently or long ago, as well as the sorrows present in this pandemic time. Do not be afraid of grief's return and lingering. Find your own ways of befriending it, and it will help you carry the sorrows of this time as well as your memories of Gretchen and any other dear ones you are carrying with you. Grief can be a doorway to the continued loving presence of our ancestors, Whether they are ancestors by blood or ancestors by choice, these are those dear ones whose lives have illuminated and blessed our own. Please join me now in a moment of silence, in tribute and in welcome to all beloved ancestors waiting on the doorsteps of our hearts today. And will you pray with me? Holy One, known by many names and beyond all naming, Spirit of life and love shining on us all today, we give thanks for the life of Gretchen Kreuter, for the energy and commitment to justice and equality that she brought to the world, for her wit and her curiosity, for her leadership, her love, and her bright flame. As we celebrate her many gifts in this hour of remembrance, let us not guard ourselves from sorrow. Rather, we pray that our hearts, now opened by grief, might stay open, that Gretchen's legacy might find its place in our own lives and continue on in us, shaped by our own way of being in the world. Open our hearts today and always to these and other cherished blessings that Gretchen shared in her being and in her becoming. May it be so, and amen.
Bist du bei mir, geh ich mit Freuden zum Sterben und zu meiner Ruhe, zum Sterben und zu meiner Ruhe. Bist du bei mir? Sterben und zu meiner Ruhe, zum Sterben und zu meiner Ruhe. Ach, wie vergnügt wär so mein Ende, es drückt an deiner schönen Hände mir die getreuen Augen zu. Ach, wie vergnügt wär so mein Ende, es drückt an deiner schönen Hände mir die getreuen Augen zu. Bist du bei mir, geh ich mit Freuden zum Sterben und zu meiner Ruhe, zum Sterben und zu meiner Ruhe.
Collage of voices is a tradition here at Unity Church, inviting people who knew our loved one to share their memories. And so these are a few memories from some of you. This is from Sarah Evans. I first met Gretchen at a meeting in the fall of 1976 at a gathering of women historians of the Midwest, also known as WHOM, at her home in St. Anthony Park. I had just moved to Minnesota to teach women's history at the University of Minnesota and was delighted to discover this wonderful group of kindred souls. Gretchen was clearly the spark plug of the group and had a lot to do with its capacious definition of historian, embracing practitioners of public history, K through 12 teachers, archivists, and journalists, as well as academics like me. WHOM was an amazing intersection of feminist intellectuals and activists that contributed significantly to Minnesota's leadership in the feminist movement of the 70s and into the 1980s. Gretchen's conviction that history belongs to everyone is wonderfully captured in her books, on one titled Women's History Tours of the Twin Cities and another Running the Twin Cities, which creatively led the general public to understanding that history is all around us. Her sharp wit and ready laugh punctuated our meetings, while her fierce commitment to our shared cause stirred us to do the work. Gretchen was a leader who called out ironies and contradictions in ways that kept us all amused and on task at the same time. Gretchen went on to teach in a number of colleges and then moved into academic administration. Her book, Forgotten Promise: Race and Gender Wars on a Small College Campus, is a wonderful case study of self-critical leadership in a setting where intentions were good and misunderstandings rife. This from Ellen Green, a member of this congregation. Gretchen had a great sense of humor. She was part of a panel about women in retirement for a retreat at Unity Church some years ago. Emily Day represented women in their 90s, Elizabeth Shippey, women in their 80s, Gretchen, women in their 70s, and yours truly, women in their 60s. We were surprised at the huge attendance. Upon her turn, Gretchen launched into a hilarious recitation on how to maintain an active sex life, with examples from her own life. I never figured out whether it was true or if she made it all up. I can't remember a time when I was with her that I didn't laugh. From Jan Sigmund. Gretchen made a difference, and she will be missed. Gretchen's talent and involvement at Kaufman extended to a number of theatrical productions presented by Kaufman players. She was definitely a player. Plays of all types and styles were performed by residents for residents, and Gretchen adored taking on any number of characters. Memorization was not required, but she always created a memorable character, even while holding a notebook of pages to be read. The last person she became was Grandma Kernitz in Neil Simon's Lost in Yonkers. She abandoned her natural good humor and created an angry, bitter, aging woman feared by her two grandsons. From Chekhov to Albee, Gretchen commanded the stage, and we loved every minute. She is forever applauded. This from Betsy Rhymes, Gretchen's daughter. My mother was a person of immense energy. Many describe her as a spitfire. She accomplished more in her lifetime than most humans could in even 2 or 3 lifetimes. As a mother, a scholar, a writer, a woman always pushing the limits of what women were expected or allowed to do, I often experience this energy as a restlessness, a need to be always on the move, racing toward a goal, the next accomplishment, a new position, a book, running a marathon, or cross-country skiing through all of the Hennepin County parks, or biking through the city streets to wherever she needed to be. As a child, I was often hustling to keep up with her, a block behind on my own bicycle, freezing my hands off on the ski trail. But I was also a part of her adventure. When I was 12, the two of us spent one summer driving across the country in her yellow Ford Pinto, camping in the Badlands, witnessing the geysers of Yellowstone Park, swimming down the river in Zion National Park, or riding mules into the Grand Canyon. This mother-daughter trip was our family vacation, Gretchen style. Unusual, heartfelt, challenging, and packed with zany moments only we could share. Her restlessness and energy often left me exhausted. But I also remember the precious breaks, rewarding ourselves with a dinner of shrimp Creole in the Grand Canyon Lodge on our arrival back from the mule trip, or back home, curling up together for an afternoon nap on her bed, never more than 30 minutes, just enough for her to renew herself for the next pursuit. Sometimes it seemed she was running away from something as much as running toward some accomplishment, maybe away from disappointment or dissatisfaction or something yet to be found, maybe never to be found. Through her accomplishments and anxieties, my mother was also restlessly good-hearted. She wanted desperately to love and be loved, to be a force for good in the world and to leave her mark, to transcend trivial expectations, to overcome the difficulties she experienced, and to include others in her fight. It's hard to believe she will be no more, or that she will ever really rest. Following that memory, Betsy asked that we share this reading from Stephen Sondheim's Into the Woods. I will not sing it for you, but those of you who know it might hear the melody as I read. No more questions, please. No more tests. Comes the day you say, "What for?" Please, no more. No more riddles, no more jests, no more curses you can't undo, left by those you never knew. No more quests. No more feelings. Time to shut the door, just no more. Running away, let's do it. Free from the ties that bind, no more despair or burdens to bear. Out there in the yonder, running away, go to it. Where did you have in mind? Have to take care. Unless there's a where, you'll only be wandering blind. Just more questions, different kind. Where are we to go? Where are we ever to go? No more giants waging war. Can't we just pursue our lives with our children and our wives till that happy day arrives? How do you ignore all the witches, all the curses, all the wolves, all the lies, the false hopes, the goodbyes, the reverses, all the wondering what even worse is still in store? All the children, all the giants. No more. Our collage of voices continues with a memory from David Kreuter, Gretchen's son. David said, Gretchen shared this quote from Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac shortly before she bought her cabin in southwestern Wisconsin. The quote is this: "What more delightful avocation than to take a piece of land and by cautious experimentation prove how it works? What more substantial service to conservation than to practice it on one's own land?" David writes, Gretchen lived these words, sort of. She sought, quote, to prove how it worked, To see how her cabin worked, she built and maintained trails, grew a flower garden, excavated and filled a pond, tilled a small plot to grow only vegetables, and constructed a 9-pillar telescope platform, which I'm going to correct David and just note that you and Bob built that platform. She advised. I'm not sure Aldo would have called all these activities cautious, though. She changed a lot of the land to get closer to it. The best example is the fire she started to clear a grove of invasive buckthorn. I was with her that day. The fire quickly got out of hand. A combination of willpower and luck saved her, me, and the cabin. It all started when she lit a 25-foot trail of gasoline to get the buckthorn burning. She insisted we each have a bucket of about a pint of water in it for safety. The buckthorn was dry and burst into high orange flames. Our water did nothing. Fire jumped the road, pushed us back to a corner of her property where we had to step into the creek. We waded up the creek to try to fight the fire from the back, but it spread into a grove of cocklebur under an ancient, mostly dead oak tree. Gretchen got on one side of the grove and I was on the other, frantically kicking dirt, pulling up plants to try to form a fire break. The fire was loud now and high enough to touch a big dead limb about 12 feet off the ground. She was somewhere on the other side of this now smoldering limb. I could not see or hear her. Then, with a loud crack, the entire limb broke off the tree and fell straight down, crashing onto and stamping out the fire long enough for us to get control. Now the smoke was thin, and on the other side of this fallen limb was Gretchen, carefully holding in both hands a live, softly squeaking bat. It was caught in the cockleburs, so I rescued him, she explained. She walked over to a dark place in the woods the fire had spared and flung it into the air, where it took flight and disappeared. We surveyed the vast tract of smoldering land, now free of cockleburs. The extent of the, quote, substantial service to conservation, per Aldo, was astounding. We had not stopped the fire. We had been spared by the fire. Gretchen seemed pleased. She then said what I now consider her trademark phrase. "Besides that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?" You could fairly say that Gretchen von Kreuter was both gifted and driven, and relentlessly dedicated to equality for women. Born in 1934, Gretchen had no end to the opportunities the world offered her to work toward that goal of equality. For historical context, which I figured she might appreciate, she was born 10 years before the first congressional resolution was introduced requiring equal pay for women, and a whole 30 years before a similar resolution actually passed Congress. Especially in the early years of her adulthood and career, when many peers and elders alike seemed content with the way things were, her fierce commitment to equality for women won her enemies as well as friends. She was, as some of you have noted, sharp in the multiple meanings of that word. And as we've already heard, she was a spitfire and a spark plug who could light a fire that made way for change. She knew how to claim the right to be taken seriously. And she also knew the importance of finding her own people with whom she didn't need to be serious, but could be funny, irreverent, and even outrageous. She was the firstborn of Marvel, Radina, and Sigmund von Lohe in Minneapolis, 7 years later joined by her younger brother Carl. Precocious from the start in both language and physical ability, she did well in school, except, as she noted in her own handwritten timeline, not so well in math, science, and, no surprise, home economics. In junior and senior high, she enjoyed acting in school plays. And when she went on to Rockford College, she began honing her leadership skills as an all-college song leader and student body president. She continued as a graduate student in American history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she met and married Kent Kreuter in 1960. And in 1961, exhibiting the drive she became known for, she gave birth to her first child, David, while also earning her PhD that same year. The family moved to Colgate, New York for Kent's first teaching appointment, and there she also taught part-time and had her second child, Betsy, in 1965 in Syracuse. When the family returned to the Twin Cities, she taught at the College of St. Kate's, at Hamlin, at Macalester, and St. Olaf. And it was at St. Olaf where she established the school's first women's studies program in 1974. One summer, the family traveled in a camper throughout England, and another summer they drove in a Fiat throughout Europe, visiting castle after castle. For an intellectual family interested in history, equality, and education, these were rich adventures. During the rest of the year, Gretchen did not stop moving at home either. She chaired the Minnesota Humanities Commission, founded an organization for women historians of the Midwest, tutored elementary students in the St. Paul Public Schools, and planned and taught a fourth-grade curriculum on cultural diversity. All this while raising her family and sharing her love of learning and adventure with her children. David remembers when he was in fourth grade, their cat had killed a mole, and Gretchen insisted that he and she perform an autopsy on the mole to learn the cause of its death. After satisfying the question, it died of internal bleeding, she then saved the mole's fur and created from it a small bearskin rug for Betsy's dollhouse. She was relentlessly curious, always looking to learn, and always looking to make something new from what she had been given. She refused to conform to the roles then assigned to women, perhaps sometimes to the detriment of the family's physical household and its condition. Babysitters sometimes voluntarily chipped in, picking up or cleaning. She also challenged societal expectations of women with her wit and her gift for words. She created presentations accompanied by slideshows with witty names like, "But can she cook?" or "Dressing down, dressing up," which was about oppressive fashion trends for women. These made her a popular speaker at many organizations, to which she toted her slide carousels, and often Betsy too, to deliver a kind of early form of TED Talk. Gretchen's energy also found outlet in physical activities. Bicycling, skiing, running her first marathon in 1979, followed by 2 more a few years later. She and Betsy did ski through every park in Hennepin County, and she bicycled everywhere, fast, as we've heard from Betsy's story. In the early 1980s, she and Kent ended their marriage, and Gretchen's career took a turn toward college administration. It turned out she had a knack for shaking things up in the best of ways, which allowed her to save 3 colleges, each from a different kind of demise. One she kept from being absorbed by another college in a version of a hostile takeover. Another school was about to lose its accreditation because of a racial incident when she arrived, and She not only rejuvenated the school, but earned a commendation from the Civil Rights Commission for how she handled it. A third she saved from bankruptcy, eliminating nearly all of its $11 million debt and renewing community bonds that were strained. These were accomplishments added to the already long list from her college teaching years, in which she developed leadership opportunities for women and established women's history programs that were not always popular with incumbent staff and made it difficult for her to earn tenure. Wherever she went, she shook things up. As David put it, her trademark was a combination of willpower and luck. She kept going until whatever she wanted to happen, happened. And sometimes she also got lucky. She won 2 first prizes at the state fair, the second of which was for homemade mint jelly, whose secret ingredient, she revealed only years later, was lime juice that she used because she had run out of lemon juice. She published 6 books, received 7 major awards, held 25 board memberships. Her letters to the editor were published in the New York Times, and her words were broadcast internationally on the Voice of America. And her impact on the world was made wider still by her ability to inspire others, sometimes convincing them to take on tasks they'd never even considered before. She was good at lending people both her vision and her confidence. At least 2 books were written because Gretchen convinced the future authors they should write. But let's not forget, Gretchen also knew how to have fun and to share a good laugh. Her 4 closest women friends, all accomplished historians, affectionately self-named the Tackies for their willingness to set decorum aside, offered her company in which she could let her hair down. They shared both a serious and a professional commitment to women's history and a desire to lighten the weight of their work with humor. So it was that one day David called home from college and was surprised to hear his mother answer the phone sounding like a chipmunk, because the Tackies were at her house and they had all just inhaled helium for the fun of hearing their voices change. In the late 1980s, Gretchen met Bob Sutton, starting a long and loving relationship and marriage that also nurtured her fondness for travel and nature. The 2 traveled to Europe, the Middle East, Central America, and they bought a cabin in rural southwestern Wisconsin. And there, for the next 20 years, Gretchen read and wrote, biked, gardened, kept bees, looked at stars, watched the birds. As a quick study, she learned the names of plants and creatures and constellations. And as a born leader, she often found a way to involve her visiting friends in completing the tasks at the cabin that needed to be done. Bob's death in 2002 was a significant loss for Gretchen. She moved back to the Twin Cities and into the Kaufman retirement community, still writing, reading, learning, biking, skiing, traveling, and acting in Kaufman plays. And then in 2015, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It was a harsh turn for someone who all her life had made her mark with words. As her illness progressed, her access to language diminished. But she was remarkably still sharp, still aware beneath that loss of words. Betsy tells of the day when she was visiting Gretchen, and Gretchen, struggling for words to describe her experience, said, "Betsy, it's awful. It's been years." And then she corrected herself, trying to name just how time dragged for her without her old abilities and her energy. She said, "No, it's been hundreds of years." Gretchen was often angry about her illness, and her outlet was to write. She wrote thousands of pages, working on 2 books, one an illustrated memoir of growing up in Minneapolis, using her own illustrations and teaching herself to draw. The other, called The Alzheimer's Letters, intended as a resource for others going through what she was experiencing. She remained physically active through last year, riding her bike with David as recently as last summer, and running a 10-meter dash with Lily, her 6-year-old great niece, on a whim last summer as well. But as her strength waned, her spirit did too. In early January, when she fell and injured herself, she spent 2 weeks in the hospital, returned home for a week, and then, as if she finally lost the drive that kept her moving and had decided it was time to go, she finally slowed down. She slept for several days, and with the 4 tackies and her son David at her side, telling stories, rubbing her feet, reading her humorous things for levity, she died on February 1st. More than one of you has said how hard it is to believe that Gretchen is finally at rest, a posture and way of being that did not come naturally to her. And Betsy and David, this may be especially difficult for you two, shaped from conception by her drive and her willful engagement with life. It can be a mixed blessing to have a parent like that, one who models and inspires empowerment and confidence, creative energy, and some zaniness. One who rides far enough ahead of you that you don't always even feel the tailwinds. A person like that often leaves much unfinished. And your task now, as her children, is not to finish her life's work, but rather to receive her energy and her confidence, and to use it at your own pace and in your own manner to fuel your life's work, which may or may not overlap with hers. And for each of us remembering her today, may this be the gift and inheritance that we receive from Gretchen's life and her dying, that we listen closely to what calls our own life into action, and then to borrow a bit of her energy, her faith in change, her inspiration to make our own way forward, each in our own manner, to continue to make this world a better place. May we each take that to be our serious work. And in Gretchen's memory, may we do it with a mischievous joy, generous laughter, and the levity that love brings. May it be so, and amen. Our final hymn today will be We Are Dancing Sarah's Circle, and the words are printed in your order of service. Friends, the words of benediction today come from George Eliot. To live is heaven. to make undying music in this world, breathing a beauteous order. Let this be our call today, to lend our own voices to this undying music, just as Gretchen did her whole life long. Go in peace.
Amen.